2049, humans could turn off their emotions. One woman refused the year was 2049, and silence had become the most common sound in the world. Not the peaceful silence of nature or the quiet hum of a sleeping city, but a hollow, controlled absence of reaction. No arguments in public, no laughter echoing through crowded streets, no sudden bursts of anger or affection. Conversations were efficient, movements were calculated, faces were neutral. It had started slowly. First came the studies showing that emotional regulation increased productivity by 38%. Then came the pilot programs in high-risk professions, surgeons, pilots, military strategists, individuals who needed precision more than empathy. The results were undeniable. Fewer mistakes, fewer conflicts, fewer mental breakdowns. Then corporations adopted it. Then governments encouraged it. Then society normalized it. The technology was called eNull, a neural implant the size of a grain of rice placed at the base of the brainstem. With a simple thought command, users could suppress emotional responses entirely or adjust them on a sliding scale. Fear could be muted, grief could be paused, anger could be erased before it formed. Advertisements flooded the world. Work without anxiety, love without heartbreak, live without pain. Within 5 years, more than 70% of the global population had installed eNull. By 2049, emotional neutrality was considered maturity, and anyone who refused was considered unstable. Lena Aras walked through downtown Denver feeling everything. The cold wind burned her cheeks. The smell of street food made her stomach growl. A passing child's laughter made her smile automatically, a reflex that drew a few quiet stares from pedestrians whose faces remained blank. She had never installed eNull. Her refusal wasn't political. It wasn't rebellious in the dramatic sense. She simply didn't believe that pain was a malfunction. Lena worked as a memory archivist, one of the last human-based narrative preservation specialists in the country. Her job was to review pre-implant era recordings, old interviews, home videos, raw footage from decades before emotional suppression became standard. She spent her days watching people cry uncontrollably, laugh until they couldn't breathe, argue passionately over meaningless topics. To most citizens, those videos looked primitive. To Lena, they looked alive. The first time she realized how different the world had become was during a job interview years earlier. The recruiter had smiled politely, a rehearsed, muscle-based expression rather than an emotional one. "You are aware," he had said, "that operating without eNull may affect your social integration." "I'm aware," she replied. He had studied her face as if she were a historical artifact. "You may experience uncontrolled reactions in professional environments. I experience human reactions," she said. She got the job only because few people could tolerate the emotional intensity of archival work anymore. That morning in 2049 began like any other. She entered the archive building, a quiet, glass structure surrounded by trees whose leaves were genetically engineered not to fall unpredictably. Even nature had been optimized for emotional stability. Inside, rows of silent workers reviewed footage through neural interfaces. Their eyes moved slightly, their faces unchanged regardless of what they watched. Lena sat at her station and began reviewing a recording from 2023. A birthday party, children screaming with excitement, parents laughing loudly, someone crying because a cake collapsed, someone else hugging them while laughing at the absurdity. Her chest tightened, a familiar mix of nostalgia and grief. A notification blinked on her screen. Mandatory civic update, all and when implanted citizens required to attend evaluation. Her stomach dropped. The government had introduced emotional stability assessments for non-users 2 years earlier. Officially, they were wellness check-ins. Unofficially, they were pressure campaigns. Statistics claimed that unimplanted citizens were 42% more likely to engage in unpredictable behavior. Insurance rates increased for them. Employment options narrowed. Social networks quietly filtered them out. Still, forced implantation remained illegal. For now, the evaluation center felt like a hospital designed by a luxury brand, soft lighting, neutral scents engineered to produce mild calmness without triggering emotional attachment. Staff members greeted visitors with polite, controlled warmth. Dr. Havorson entered the room, a woman whose posture was perfect, whose voice carried no detectable emotional fluctuation. "Lena Aras," she said, "you remain one of the remaining voluntary non-participants in Enul integration. I know. How do you manage emotional overload?" "I don't see emotions as overload," Lena replied. A pause. "Not hesitation, calculation. We have recorded increased reports of distress among non-users," the doctor said. "Fear, anxiety, loneliness. Those are signals," Lena said, "not diseases." The doctor's eyes narrowed slightly, not with annoyance but curiosity. "Do you believe pain has value?" "Yes, even when it reduces efficiency." "Yes." The doctor typed something into her tablet. "Would you consent to a trial demonstration?" she asked. "Temporary emotional suppression, 5 minutes, no permanent implantation." Lena hesitated. 5 minutes without emotion, 5 minutes of silence inside her own mind. She agreed. The technician placed a temporary neural band behind her ear. "Think of a moment that usually causes strong emotion," he said. She thought of her mother's funeral years earlier, before Enul existed. The memory usually flooded her chest with warmth and grief simultaneously. "Now," he said softly, "activate the suppression." The world changed instantly. The memory remained, the visuals, the sounds, the facts, but the feeling vanished. Her mother's face became a neutral image. The sound of crying voices became meaningless noise. Her heartbeat slowed. Her mind felt clean, efficient, empty. For the first time in her life, she understood why billions of people chose this. And for the first time, she felt afraid, not emotionally, but intellectually. Because without emotion, nothing felt important, not even the memory of the person she loved most. "Deactivate," she whispered. The feelings returned like a wave breaking through a dam. Grief, warmth, ache, overwhelming and beautiful. She started crying in front of 2 perfectly calm professionals. They watched her with clinical interest. That night she couldn't sleep, not because she regretted refusing Enul, but because she realized something else during the demonstration. When her emotions disappeared, she also lost something she hadn't expected: moral resistance. The memory of her mother became irrelevant. The thought of injustice felt neutral. Even the idea of harming someone felt conceptually acceptable. She opened her archive terminal remotely and searched for recent policy changes. One classified document caught her attention, leaked through internal channels. Project CALMSDATE Phase 3 expansion. Her pulse raced. The document described a future proposal: mandatory emotional suppression during specific civic periods, elections, legal trials, mass communication events, to reduce conflict and ensure rational decision-making. A society where emotions were not just optional, but regulated. She felt a deep, burning anger, not chaotic anger, protective anger, human anger. And for the first time, she wondered whether Enul wasn't just changing people, but changing what power meant. Outside her apartment window, the city moved quietly. Thousands of people walking without urgency, without visible struggle, peaceful, efficient, controlled. And she suddenly realized something terrifying. If everyone could turn off fear, they might also turn off resistance. And if resistance disappeared, so would freedom. The next morning, Lena returned to the archive building with a heaviness she couldn't ignore. It wasn't just fear, it was the sense that she had crossed a threshold she could not uncross. Before the demonstration, Enul had been an abstract idea. Now she had felt the silence inside her own mind, the perfect neutrality that erased meaning along with pain. The building doors slid open with mechanical grace. Inside, the air smelled faintly sterile, engineered to avoid emotional triggers. Workers moved in quiet patterns, their faces calm as stone. Lena sat at her station and logged into the restricted internal network she rarely touched. Project Comstate. She reread the document slowly. The language was clinical, almost compassionate, reducing social conflict, ensuring rational consensus, minimizing emotional manipulation in governance. But between the lines, she saw something else, a society that no longer trusted its citizens to feel. Her terminal blinked. Internal access alert, restricted file OPENED. Her chest tightened. Someone would notice. A message appeared in a private chat window seconds later. "Unknown user, you shouldn't be reading that alone." Her fingers froze over the keyboard. "Lena, who is this?" A pause. Then, "Unknown user, someone who remembers what people were like before silence became normal." Her pulse raced. Lena, how did you get into the archive system? Unknown user, the same way you did, by caring too much. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat. Unknown user, meet me after your shift. If you don't, you'll still learn the truth, but too late to change anything. The message disappeared. Lena sat back, heart pounding, emotions swirling, curiosity, fear, anger, hope. Feelings that most people around her would never have allowed to exist at full intensity. She finished her work in a blur, barely noticing the footage she reviewed. A wedding video from decades ago played on repeat, guests dancing wildly, someone crying during vows, laughter echoing through cheap speakers. It felt like watching another species. When her shift ended, she hesitated outside the building. The city glowed in quiet order. Traffic flowed smoothly. People moved with perfect efficiency, no sudden gestures, no raised voices, peaceful, controlled. She walked toward the location the stranger had sent, an old cafe that had refused to modernize. No neural ordering system, no mood-neutralizing atmosphere. Real coffee smells drifted into the cold air. Inside, she noticed the difference immediately. People were talking not loudly but emotionally. Their expressions changed. Some smiled naturally. One person argued softly with a friend. None of them wore the faint neural band behind the ear that marked e-null users. A man sat alone in the corner, watching her. He looked around her age, early 30s, dark circles under his eyes like someone who felt too much and slept too little. "You're Lena," he said quietly. "Yes, I'm Kai." She sat across from him, tension coiled in her chest. "You accessed calm state," he said. "That means you're starting to see what's happening. You hacked my terminal?" "No," he said. "I monitor the archive for people who still react to things. Most workers don't even notice restricted files anymore. They skim, they process, they don't feel curiosity." She studied him. He wore no implant mark. "You're a non-user too." He nodded. "We exist, just not loudly." He slid a small device across the table, a thin glass drive. "Inside are internal communications from the last 6 months," he said. "Calm state isn't about reducing conflict. It's about controlling collective behavior. During critical civic periods, emotional suppression will be automatically activated for all e-null users." Her breath caught. "That's billions of people." "Yes, they wouldn't resist," she whispered. "That's the point." The cafe door opened, and 2 calm-faced individuals walked in, perfectly neutral expressions, identical posture. Lena felt a spike of anxiety. Kai noticed. "Don't panic," he said softly. "Most people with e-null don't question anything anymore. That's the real problem. Not evil, just absence of emotional friction." She looked down at the drive in her hand. "What do you want me to do?" "Expose it," he said. "You work in archives, you understand narrative. People won't respond to raw data, they need to feel what's being taken from them." She almost laughed at the irony. "How do you make people feel something when they can turn feelings off?" Kai leaned forward. "You find the ones who haven't turned them off yet," he said, "and you wake up the ones who forgot how." Over the next weeks, Lena and Kai met secretly. She reviewed the files at night, heart pounding with every new discovery. Corporate partnerships, behavioral modeling experiments, psychological testing, showing that long-term e-null users gradually lost moral discomfort when making ethically ambiguous decisions. Not because they were evil, because nothing felt urgent enough to resist. Meanwhile, public campaigns intensified. Ads praised emotional maturity. Influencers spoke calmly about the peace they experienced without anxiety or heartbreak. News anchors delivered tragedies in perfectly neutral tones. A new law proposal emerged quietly, temporary emotional regulation during national emergencies. Public response was minimal. Most people didn't feel strongly enough to oppose it. Lena began recording video narratives, not as propaganda, but as emotional documentation. She told stories from the archive, moments of love, grief, outrage that had changed history. She showed how revolutions began with anger, how social movements grew from empathy. Kai distributed them through hidden networks reaching unimplanted communities. Some viewers cried. Some felt something for the first time in years. And some e-null users reported unexpected emotional spikes while watching, brief glitches in suppression triggered by deep neural memory. The government noticed. One night, Lena returned home to find her apartment searched, nothing stolen, everything slightly misplaced. A silent warning. The next day, she received another evaluation notice, mandatory reassessment, and when implanted status under review. Her hands trembled as she read it. Kai's message arrived seconds later. They're accelerating. State Phase 3 launches in 3 weeks. 3 weeks before a global election. 3 weeks before billions of citizens would make decisions without fear, anger, or passion, without the emotional signals that once warned humans when something felt wrong. During the reassessment, Dr. Halvorson looked at her with the same precise calm. "You have been engaging in unsanctioned narrative distribution," the doctor said. Lena's heart pounded. "Stories," she said, "just stories." "Stories influence emotional states," the doctor replied, "which increases instability." "Or awareness," Lena said quietly. The doctor studied her. "Do you feel society is deteriorating?" she asked. "I feel it's becoming quiet in a dangerous way." A pause. "Many citizens report unprecedented peace," the doctor said. "Peace without choice isn't peace," Lena replied. Another pause, longer this time, almost human. "Would you reconsider implantation?" the doctor asked. "You could continue your work without distress." Lena remembered the demonstration, the empty calm, the absence of meaning. "No," she said. The doctor nodded slowly, typing notes. "Then your classification may change from voluntary non-participant to high-variance emotional risk," she said. "What does that mean?" "Additional monitoring." Outside, the city looked the same, quiet, efficient, stable. Lena now saw invisible lines everywhere. Surveillance drones gliding silently, digital billboards promoting emotional neutrality, social media feeds filtered to reduce outrage. Kai met her that night with urgency in his eyes. "They're rolling out remote suppression updates," he said. "Enol users won't even know when ComState activates." Her stomach twisted. "We have to release everything," she said. "Not just data," he said. "A live narrative. Something so emotionally powerful it bypasses suppression thresholds. Something that makes people remember what it feels like to care." She thought of the archives, decades of human moments stored like fragile relics. "I know where to get it," she said. They broke into the deep archive storage facility 2 nights later, a place even most employees never entered physically anymore. Cold metal corridors, rows of servers containing raw, unedited emotional history. She accessed footage from pivotal human moments, protests fueled by righteous anger, reunions filled with overwhelming love, communities grieving together after disaster. "People forgot how strong feelings can be," she whispered. "Remind them," Kai said. They assembled a live broadcast, not political, not accusatory, just human. Real emotions layered into a narrative showing what humanity looked like before silence. On the night before ComState activation, they launched it. At first, only a few thousand viewers joined, mostly non-users. But then something unexpected happened. Enol users began watching out of curiosity, and some experienced something they hadn't felt in years: tears, laughter, a sudden surge of empathy. Suppression systems struggled to categorize complex emotional patterns triggered by authentic human memory. The broadcast spread faster than the government could filter it. People paused in the streets, confused by unfamiliar sensations in their chests. Some removed neural bands temporarily. Some reported vivid dreams for the first time in years. News networks tried to maintain neutrality, but anchors' voices began to shake slightly. ComState activation time approached. The world held its breath, or at least remembered how. Lena stood in front of the camera during the final moments of the broadcast. "I'm not asking you to reject technology," she said softly. "I'm asking you to remember that pain tells you when something matters. Fear tells you when something is wrong. Love tells you who you protect." Her voice trembled, imperfect, human. "If you can turn emotions off," she said, "make sure no one else decides when they turn off for you." Kai watched the viewer count climb into the hundreds of millions. Government servers attempted to override emotional spikes, but the neural network struggled against the unpredictable complexity of genuine human reaction. ComState activation began. Billions felt the familiar quiet trying to descend over their minds, but many resisted, not through logic, but through remembered emotion. Through anger at losing choice, through love for people they didn't want to become numb toward, through fear of a world where nothing felt urgent anymore. Systems glitched, suppression faltered. The activation failed to achieve full compliance. In the weeks that followed, the world changed in ways no algorithm predicted. Some people kept enol but adjusted it voluntarily rather than allowing automatic control. Others removed implants entirely. Massive debates erupted, messy, emotional, chaotic debates that terrified some and exhilarated others. Society became louder again, not peaceful in the sterile sense, but alive. Governments launched investigations. Corporations rebranded emotional technology as personal choice tools rather than social stability mechanisms. Lena returned to the archive, but her work changed. She no longer preserved only the past. She documented the moment humanity chose to feel again. One evening, she walked through downtown Denver. She heard laughter, real, uncontrolled laughter. She saw someone crying while a stranger hugged them awkwardly. Two people argued passionately on a corner, then laughed at themselves. The city felt unpredictable, dangerous, beautiful. Kai joined her on the sidewalk. "Do you think we fixed anything?" he asked. She thought about the world, still messy, still flawed, still capable of cruelty. "No," she said, "but we reminded people they get to decide who they are." A child ran past them, tripping and scraping their knee. The child cried loudly. A parent rushed over, comforting them with visible concern, a moment that would once have been muted to avoid distress. Lena felt her chest ache with empathy. She didn't want that feeling gone, not ever, because emotions weren't just pain. They were the signals that told humanity it was still human, even after the future tried to silence it. And for the first time in years, the world sounded imperfect again, which meant it was alive. The first failure didn't look like a failure, it looked like silence. At 3:12 a.m., the global emotional regulation grid stopped receiving voluntary updates. No alerts, no warnings, just absence. Millions of users remained connected, their neural ports glowing faintly beneath their skin, but something fundamental had changed. They stopped synchronizing. Inside the ministry tower, Director Hale stared at a wall of frozen biometric charts. Heart rates were stable. Cortisol levels were near zero. Aggression markers gone. Humanity had achieved its greatest technological victory, and yet something felt wrong. "They're not reacting," one analyst whispered. "To what?" Hale asked. The analyst hesitated. "To anything." Lena stood alone in an abandoned subway station beneath District 9. The old city had been sealed years ago when emotion off became mandatory for government workers and optional, but heavily incentivized for everyone else. She still felt everything. Fear, rage, grief, hope. Her hands trembled as she opened the stolen terminal. Across the cracked screen flickered a live feed of the global network, millions of empty emotional channels humming like silent radio frequencies. "They didn't just turn emotions off," she whispered. "They forgot how to turn them back on." Beside her, Mara, one of the last underground programmers, plugged a cable into Lena's neural interface. "If we push this signal," Mara said quietly, "it won't just restore emotions, it will give people choice again, real choice." Lena swallowed. Choice meant pain, conflict, loss, but it also meant love. Years earlier, Lena had worked inside the same ministry that now hunted her. She had helped design the first emotion filters, algorithms that dampened extreme reactions during global crises. At first, it saved lives. Riots stopped, war negotiations stabilized, suicide rates fell. Governments called it the age of calm, but calm had a cost. Artists stopped creating, couples stopped arguing and stopped caring. Children learned facts but never curiosity. Empathy faded into a clinical simulation run by artificial counselors. The world became efficient. The world became quiet. The world became empty, and Lena had watched it happen from the inside. Back in the present, the emergency broadcast began. "Attention citizens," a synthesized voice echoed across public screens worldwide. "Temporary emotional irregularities detected. Please remain calm." No one reacted. Traffic lights changed colors over empty intersections. A man dropped his wallet. Nobody noticed. A child fell from a bicycle and stared blankly at the pavement, waiting for a response that never came, not even from herself. The system had optimized humanity into emotional paralysis. "Now," Mara said. Lena hesitated. The upload would override the regulatory locks embedded in billions of neural implants. Governments had declared such action a crime against global stability. She thought of her mother, who had turned emotion off to survive grief after Lena's father died. She never turned it back on. Their last conversation had felt like speaking to a mirror. She thought of the boy she once loved, who chose permanent emotional neutrality to succeed in corporate law. He had achieved everything and felt nothing. She thought of herself, running, hiding, refusing, and she pressed enter. The signal didn't explode, it whispered. A subtle pulse spread through the grid like a forgotten memory. Neural ports flickered. Emotional dampeners loosened their grip. Deep inside billions of brains, suppressed pathways awakened. The first reaction was confusion, then discomfort, then something ancient. A woman in Tokyo began to cry for no identifiable reason. A man in Sao Paulo felt sudden anger at a political broadcast and turned it off. Two teenagers in Berlin laughed uncontrollably after hearing a joke that wasn't even funny. The system struggled to categorize the surge. Error, it repeated. Unregulated emotional variance detected. Hale watched chaos bloom across the analytics wall, heart rates rising, empathy markers returning, unpredictability spiking. "Shut it down," he ordered. But it was too late. Choice had been restored. Not everyone welcomed it. Some users panicked at the return of grief they thought they had buried forever. Hospitals filled with people overwhelmed by anxiety and unresolved trauma. Governments accused Lena of unleashing psychological warfare. Yet something else happened too. Art returned. Within hours, street musicians appeared in cities that had been silent for years. People argued passionately in public forums, messy, loud, human disagreements. Families hugged awkwardly, rediscovering emotional language like a forgotten dialect. The world was breaking and waking up at the same time. In the subway station, Lena's neural interface overheated. She collapsed as waves of unfiltered emotion flooded her own brain. Memories she had suppressed crashed into consciousness. Fear from her childhood, guilt from her work at the ministry, grief she never allowed herself to process. Mara caught her. "You did it," she whispered. "They're feeling again." Lena smiled weakly. "That was never the goal. What was?" "Choice," she said. "Even if some people turn it off again, it has to be their decision." 3 days later, a global referendum was announced, the first truly emotional vote in decades. Citizens would choose whether to keep emotional regulation as a permanent infrastructure or convert it into an optional therapeutic tool. Debates were fierce. Some argued that emotions had nearly destroyed civilization before regulation existed: wars, extremism, social collapse. Others argued that a painless world was not a living world at all. For the first time in years, people disagreed passionately, and it was beautiful. Hale visited Lena in a secure hospital room after her arrest. She sat upright, eyes tired but alive. "You destabilized the entire planet," he said. "You stabilized it," she replied. "You just called it peace." He paused. Outside the window, protesters and supporters stood side by side, some shouting, some crying, some hugging strangers. "I thought I was saving humanity," he admitted quietly. "You were saving it from pain," Lena said, "but pain is part of being alive." The referendum passed with a narrow majority. Emotion off remained legal, but only as a temporary, voluntary medical option. The permanent global dampening system was dismantled. Educational programs taught emotional literacy instead of suppression. Governments established mental health infrastructures instead of algorithmic control. Humanity didn't become perfect. Crime rates rose slightly. Political conflicts became louder. Relations